the craziest scams in every time period. The Stone Age. Admittedly, this section is going to be rather short, for a couple of reasons, primarily being that the Stone Age is literally prehistoric, meaning that everything I'm about to discuss is essentially speculative. Also, because most of human life in the Stone Age was extremely simple, meaning that at this point, human life wasn't even able to comprehend the possibility of deception. If you had something that another human wanted, there was two options. Either they kill you to get the thing, or they die trying to kill you to get that thing. That was realistically the extent of scams in the Stone Age. Keep in mind, the Stone Age literally extends over 3.4 million years worth of history. The Stone Age contains 99.3% of all recorded human history, dating back around 300,000 years ago when Homo sapiens first appeared. So with that being said, what are some scams that could have possibly existed in the Stone Age? And let me present you a few interesting opportunities. Scam number 1, the made you look scam. Here's how the scam goes. You are a caveman, and your enemy, also a caveman, comes to ask you a question. You decide you've had enough of his antics and point in the direction that's behind him. This caveman turns around, you pull out your trusty club and hit him in the head. Now, your enemy is dead, and you have just successfully committed a Stone Age scam. In modern terms, that's not much of a scam at all. When it comes to prehistoric humans, things were simple. Just think about that one episode of SpongeBob that took place in the prehistoric times. That's kind of what we're working with here. But besides the petty theft and petty murder of the Stone Age, I believe one of the biggest scams out of the Stone Age was actually the existence of the Stone Age itself. You see, the Stone Age primarily is defined by its use of stone tools, specifically near the very end of the Stone Age. And this is because humans using stone tools signifies the evolution of human creativity, human engineering, human development. Now, you may be thinking, well, of course, we need this human development. This isn't a scam at all. This is beautiful. This is progress. And what I would say to you is, not really. Because look where it's gotten us. As humans, we used to sleep outside under the stars, do whatever we wanted all day, go to the bathroom anywhere. We essentially lived like animals, and it was great. Just look how good your dog or cat has it right now. We used to live like them, but now we wake up to an alarm, we go to a job, we commute, we have anxiety, we have bills. Our bills even have bills at this point. So although this scam may have not taken place in the Stone Age, it definitely started in the Stone Age. And potentially one of the biggest scams of the Stone Age was that one meddling, weaselly little caveman that decided to combine a stick with a rock. And maybe if he was the one who got clubbed, we would still be living that sweet animalistic lifestyle. This first section was a bit silly, but I didn't want to leave this Stone Age out of a video about every time period. But with that being said, as we now transition into recorded history, the scams are going to be historically documented and much more serious. But this is a Trust Me Bro video, so don't expect a documentary. The Bronze Age. No, not LeBron James. The Bronze Age. Not LeBron's Age. The Bronze Age. Yes, that was corny, and yes, we're keeping it in. We are now in the Bronze Age, the beginning of recorded scams. And the scam I'm going to be speaking about from the Bronze Age involves metal fraud, and also includes the earliest ever recorded customer complaint. Let me explain. The year is circa 1750 BC, right near the end of the Bronze Age. And there is a famous copper merchant named Ea Nasser. Ea Nasser, unsurprisingly, would buy and sell metals, specifically copper. And this merchant was no stranger to customer complaints, with one of the most famous examples coming from a customer named Nani. Nani's specific issue with Ea Nasser was that Ea Nasser was selling bad quality or low quality copper, and that was a big issue for Nani. Unlike the Stone Age, I'm not just making this up. This transaction and subsequent complaint is recorded in commercial tablets. These tablets were actually unearthed with a group of other tablets recording transactions and complaints about the copper quality. And these were all found in a home that was believed to at one point been owned by Ea Nasser, which is by itself just a really cool piece of history. Ea Nasser was a well-known copper merchant in his city and was even a member of an established and, relatively speaking, respected copper guild, meaning that he wasn't just any Joe Schmo. However, these credentials definitely didn't help him with his business dealings, because although he may have been surrounded by proper, integral copper merchants, Nasser was likely nothing of the sort. And this is proven by the famous tablet sent to Nasser from Nani. which has actually been translated, and I'm about to read exactly what Nani said to Nasir, and I'll let you decide whether or not Nasir was a scammer. The tablet reads as follows. When you came, you said to me as follows. I will give Gimosin fine quality copper ingots. You left, but then you did not do what you promised. You put ingots which were not good before my messenger and said, if you want to take them, take them. If you do not want to take them, go away. Who do you take me for, that you treat someone like me with such contempt? I have sent as messengers gentlemen like ourselves to collect the bag with my money, but you have treated me with contempt by sending them back empty-handed several times. And that through enemy territory. Is there anyone among the merchants who trade with Dilmun who has treated me in this way? You alone treat my messenger with contempt. On account of that one trifling mina of silver which I owe you, you feel free to speak in such a way. While I have given to the palace on your behalf 1,080 pounds of copper, and Shubi Abum has likewise given 1,080 pounds of copper, apart from what we had both had written on a sealed tablet to be kept in the temple of Shamash. How have you treated me for that copper? You have withheld my money bag from me in enemy territory. It is now up to you to restore my money to me in full. Take cognizance that from now on I will not accept here any copper from you that is not of fine quality. I shall from now on select and take the ingots individually in my own yard, and I shall exercise against you my right of rejection because you have treated me with contempt. That was long, but I wanted to give you the exact full quote because I think it's extremely interesting, and I think that Nani's being rather patient and has more than enough reason to be upset. To summarize, Nasir, at least to Nani, is selling low quality copper, and not only is he selling a low quality product, but he's promising a high quality product, and when questioned by the servants that are going to pick up the product, he is not nice at all. He's very combative within these transactions, and not only that, he's also refusing to give a full or even partial refund to Nani after his complaint, and Nani has sent multiple messengers to collect a refund. And what does Nasir do? Turns him away empty-handed and sends him through enemy territory to risk the life of the messenger just to add insult to injury for Nani. I don't know about you, but if I was Nani, I would definitely be sending somebody else to Nasir's door that wasn't a messenger looking for my money back. But even after all of this, Nani isn't even refusing to deal with Nasir anymore. He's just saying that once he gets the copper from Nasir, he's going to go through and verify the quality himself before he buys it, which is something he likely should have been doing, but I guess didn't feel like he had to be doing because he was buying from a merchant in the Copper Guild. But lesson learned on Nani's part, check your metal as you buy it. So yeah, this one tablet that was found thousands of years after it was created went on to solidify Nasir as one of the most notorious Bronze Age businessmen and scammers. Before we get to the next section, I actually want to jump ahead because I do want to discuss a scam from the modern era that most people are still falling for: overpaying for wireless earbuds. Fortunately, this video is sponsored by Raycon. Raycon offers a premium quality product while still maintaining an affordable price tag. And I'm talking like half the price of some other earbuds. The latest version of Raycon's earbuds are the best version yet and offer 32 hours of battery life and multi-point connectivity. They also have quick charging, meaning that if you're in a pinch and can only charge for 10 minutes, you still have up to 90 minutes of battery. They also offer active noise cancellation, which I love using specifically in the gym because when I'm working out, I want to listen to my music. Father's Day is coming up and nobody's dad wants another tie. So whether you want to get yourself the earbuds that you deserve or you want to get your dad the best gift of his life, Raycon has you covered. They're ergonomically designed to fit the widest range of ears possible, and they have a ton of color options for their earbuds and have these cool protective cases. I personally got the black with the cement case. Go to buyraycon.com/TMB to get 15% off site-wide. Brought to you by Raycon. If either of you don't love your Raycon earbuds, they offer a 30-day happiness guarantee return policy, no questions asked. Use my link in the description to get your Raycon earbuds today. Thank you, Raycon, for sponsoring this video. Now, let's get to the next time period. The Iron Age. The Iron Age is a very interesting time period, and it represents a change of power, at least in the world of metals, as the Iron Age literally represents iron becoming the prominent metal that is being mined, forged, and fashioned into tools and ornaments and armor. And the reason that transition was made is kind of a long story, but the transition from Bronze Age to Iron Age was harsh, and humanity as a whole took a step backwards before it could take 2 steps forwards as it transitioned from the Bronze Age to the Iron Age. However, the Iron Age is not free from scams, and it itself has a very interesting laundry list of scams that took place, with the one that I'm going to focus on involving silver coinage, debasement, and hyperinflation. Admittedly, the scam I'm about to discuss kind of bleeds out of the Iron Age, but I had other scams I wanted to associate with other time periods, so although this specific scam doesn't take place in the Iron Age, it definitely has its roots in the Iron Age. So I'm going to allow that technicality to make this work, because trust me, we do have some crazy scams coming up. The Iron Age is when we truly clearly see the rise of coinage being used. During the mid to late Iron Age, we see coins being minted and being transacted with, which during this time in history, circa 600 BC, is a relatively new methodology of transacting, because up until this point, all of commerce was conducted through trade, one good for another. There was no store of value. It was simply merchandise for merchandise, no currency of any sort, at least in the form of coinage. Prior to coinage, precious metals were definitely the currency of choice, but they weren't necessarily currency, just something of value to most people, and a good way to store value efficiently, as they were non-perishable and value dense for the most part. Now, even during this time in the late Iron Age, these coins that were being made weren't even used for transacting yet. They were primarily religious objects, typically used as badges or medals. But it didn't take too long for these people that were creating these interesting, valuable medals to create something that had trade value. Specifically with ancient Greek coinage being minted by the Ionian Greeks in the late 6th century, right at the ass crack of the Iron Age. And it is believed that these ancient Greek coins were the first coins ever to be used for transacting on a large-scale basis, and they were made primarily of small silver fractions. But this recent innovation of commerce spread like wildfire through the 5th and 6th century BC, and quickly became the standard, primarily being pioneered by the ancient Greeks and other empires of the time. But this in itself isn't the scam, it's simply the context for the scam that we are about to discuss. This context is important because it anchors us to the Iron Age, although what we're about to discuss happens slightly after the Iron Age, and involves actually the Roman Empire. During the Iron Age, ancient Rome is established, and during the end of the Iron Age, the Roman Republic is established. And during these times, the innovation with iron is giving Rome a lot of strength and a lot of military capability. And due to the rise of ancient Rome and then the Roman Republic, we find ourselves with the Roman Empire, which, like I mentioned, isn't in the Iron Age, but we're making it count. And it's with the Roman Empire that we find ourselves with our very next scam. The scam being coin debasement. And this one scam actually ended up being a contributing factor to the fall of the Roman Empire. By the time that the Roman Empire was established, coinage was in full effect and used effectively, and worked as follows. Early coinage would be made out of pure or near pure materials, typically gold, silver, and copper. These ingots would be purchased, minted, and then sold into circulation with a face value slightly above their metal value. This allowed the government to make a small profit on every coin that they minted, and also allowed the currency to keep a consistent value, as it had an intrinsic value of the metal it was made out of, while it also had a face value of only slightly above that, which everyone generally accepted. Coins typically varied in value from region to region, meaning that in simple modern terms, if you had a coin that had a face value of $2, but was, made out of $1.50's worth of silver, in your region, you can trade this for $2. But if you go to a different region where they have their own coinage, they're not going to accept your coinage at face value, but they'll take it at intrinsic value, meaning that your $2 coin in this new region is now worth $1.50. And this system actually incentivized local trade, as you are going to get the most bang for your buck. But the scam we are going to discuss is the debasement of coin that happened when the government wanted to inflate the number of coins that they could produce, and they tried to do so rather sneakily. There was two primary methods of debasement when they started to use this practice. When the government would mint these coins, they would either make them slightly lighter than they were supposed to be, meaning that they would mint a coin and then shave parts off of it to reclaim small scraps, or they would simply use a poor quality metal. This would save them money and make the coins that they're minting cheaper, while they would still be selling them for the same face value, giving the government extra funds. But these methods of debasement continued and began to progress and became more and more severe. What the Roman Empire began to do was start devaluing their coins by not making them a little lighter or using a lower quality material, but actually reducing the percentage of precious metals in the coins. Early coinage of the Roman Empire consisted of anywhere from 93 to 97% of the precious metal they were supposed to be, but it didn't take long for the government to reduce this number from 93% in 107 AD to 78.5% in 193 AD, and then to 35% in 254 AD, and then 20% in 257 AD, and then all the way down until 5% silver in 270 AD. The impact of this was obviously massive, as this massive influx of token supply and massive decline in intrinsic value of these tokens created hyperinflation, and runaway hyperinflation actually happened multiple times throughout the Roman Empire. As I mentioned before, most of this debasement would happen to fund military campaigns to try to get more land, more money, more power, and they likely justified this debasement by saying they were going to collect more wealth for the greater empire. Although what really happened was prices would rise, and the value of coins that everybody was collecting, holding, trading with was dropping significantly. And it wasn't unheard of for an army to go on a campaign, get paid their money, only to realize that once they go to spend their money, the big paycheck that they thought they had gotten is now only worth a few days' meals, which obviously put pressure between the government and the army, something that no government wants to have. I think it's important to note that in modern times, the creation of money and steady inflation is something we kind of just accept, and it's part of how our currency operates. However, at this time, each individual coin had an intrinsic value, and that was the backing of its value. And even if you paid for currency in your local region and took it to a different region, even if they did not accept your region's currency, they would still pay you what your precious metal was worth, meaning that your money could never go to nothing. I suppose to put it in a modern day context, imagine if the government just said, hey, actually it's cheaper to make $1 bills than it is to make $5 bills. So all new $1 bills are actually 5. And the government just wrote a 5 on a $1 bill. You can still see that it's a $1 bill, but you and everyone else is supposed to act like it's a $5 bill. That's gonna create some suspiciousness. And even that, admittedly, is a bad analogy because the currency that we use today all has the same intrinsic value of nothing, at least not in its physical form. With early coinage in the Iron Age, there was forgery, debasement, and fraud. But I wanted to cover the hyperinflation of the Roman Empire because I thought it was a great summary of what was brewing in the Iron Age at a major historical scale. And while the Roman Empire did not exist in the Iron Age, ancient Rome did. And I'm making this point abundantly clear to prevent any sort of misinformation. And truthfully, the hyperinflation of the Roman Empire was the best example of coin debasement I could find. So I decided to take a story out of the future and apply it to the Iron Age to make the section the best it could be. So yeah, Rome was formed in the Iron Age, coins were formed in the Iron Age, but likely the most famous example of coin debasement and hyperinflation happened a little after and involved the Roman government literally scamming its people by making the currency cheaper and worse while still maintaining the same face value. And well, it backfired on everybody. The Classical Era. Although we are now in the Classical Era, the scam that we're about to discuss is anything but classy and actually contains what is believed to be the first instance of insurance fraud, which is just great to hear that people have been committing insurance fraud for thousands of years. Perhaps insurance fraud is just in our DNA. In the Classical Era, there was a man in ancient Greece known as Hegestratos, and he was a little bit of a knucklehead. During roughly 5th century BCE, near the beginning of the Classical Era, maritime trade was booming. Hegestratos was a ship owner and was profiting from this maritime trade that was taken off. And because he had a big and beautiful and shiny ship, he decided that it would be wise to get insurance, which he did. And this insurance not only covered his cargo, but also his ship on any given sea voyage. How it would work is lenders would lend money to these seafarers using the ship and its loot as collateral. The lender would say, hey, your boat is worth 2 gold ingots and everything in it is worth 5 gold ingots. Great, I'll give you 7 gold ingots. If you come back from your journey of trade with 10 ingots worth of stuff, that's great. Give me 9 ingots. That means I make a 2 ingot profit and you make a 1 ingot profit. But if your ship sinks while you're on this voyage, you don't have to give me anything. That's essentially how the insurance existed, and this helped mitigate the risk for the seafarer and also gave these lenders the opportunity to make money with some risk, but obviously nobody was going to be incentivized to sink their own ship or not come back with loot. The whole point of the voyage was to make money, right? That's where Hegestratos comes in. Hegestratos realized that he didn't actually need to go on any adventures at all, and he didn't even need to fill up his boat with loot. What Hegestratos ended up deciding to do was he would fill his ship with things that looked valuable, and what he would typically do was fill crates with sand, cheap ornaments, with sometimes boxes of valuables on top to make it appear that the whole ship was full of valuables, when in reality there was a layer of valuables on top of a lot of boxes of basically garbage. This would make the ship appear heavy and full and also give creditors a good reason to give him a good insurance policy. Already, Hegestratos was scamming because creditors would give Hegestratos an inflated value, essentially. If Hegestratos was able to convince creditors that his boat was worth at least 2 gold ingots and the contents of his boat were extremely expensive dyes and spices and metals, maybe they would say that the contents of his boat were worth 10 gold ingots, when in reality it was only worth 2 gold ingots when the rest was dirt and sand. That is obviously a scam. But now, sure, Hegestratos has a bunch of gold ingots, but he also has debt. And he's not going to go sail away and make money off of dirt. So what does he do instead? Well, he would go take this boat and deliberately sink it. Now, all of the money that the creditor had given him was his money, fair and straight. And he really was out nothing. And he could continue this plan over and over. And it wasn't long before Hegestratos' scam was exposed. And this kind of shocked the ancient Greek world, because during this time, there was integrity and respect for the law and understanding when it came to commerce. And such a fraud was not even necessarily thought of. But when this scam was exposed, it kind of exposed the vulnerability in these early financial contracts and how people could manipulate things in a way that may seem counterintuitive but would ultimately be beneficial for the scammer. The case of Hegestratos is considered to be one of the biggest scams of the classical era. Not only because it was just so ballsy, but also because it was the first instance of insurance scam and kind of gave the entire insurance industry a huge shakeup and a wake-up call for how they had to protect themselves moving forward when they were crediting people who could potentially screw them over. So yeah, the classical era, I'm sure, had more scams than you could count, but I definitely think the case of Hegestratos is one of the most interesting and definitely one of the most defining of this time period, the medieval era. I don't know about you, but I feel like the medieval era is definitely one of the most interesting parts of history. You have castles, knights, kingdoms, wealth inequality, and a plethora of scams. What is there not to enjoy? It was honestly a bit tough to pick just one scam for the medieval era, but I'm happy with the one I chose, so let's get right into it. There's no doubt that in medieval times, the Christian religion was everything. And this is kind of proven by all of the art, architecture, writings. Everything was the Christian religion. And with every fan base comes collectors. And while the Christian religion didn't necessarily have marketable plushies at the time, they definitely had a huge underground market for relics. And these relics were definitely odd, to say the least. Potentially the most famous Christian relic would be the Holy Grail, but it's definitely not the only relic that people were interested in getting their hands on, with some of the most popular and sought after ancient relics being the literal bones of saints. Like, let's say there was a famous saint who was very prolific and known in the church. Well, once they die, if you could get one of their bones, you could possess their magical powers. Like, literally, that was the mindset. Merchants and other saints and even individuals wanted these bones for a plethora of different reasons. Wealthy individuals would typically want to collect these relics to help make their own desires and dreams come true, as these Christian relics were believed to essentially cause miracles. And in that instance, if there was an object that could bless you, that could make all of your dreams come true, that could protect your family and defeat your enemies, is there really a price you wouldn't pay for them? But here's the thing. Not many people had this money at all. And what people resorted to was visiting churches that had these relics so that they could gain the power and benefit of them from a fraction of the price. And that's exactly why bishops and priests would collect these relics. Obviously, they would see the value of these blessed items that could provide miracles as something that they would want to have in their life and in their church, but they also noticed that any church with a relic was gaining more foot traffic, more donations, and became more or less of a landmark and a hotspot for pilgrimages. And this is where the business opportunity arose. Merchants, whether they believed in the power of these relics or not, if a merchant was able to get their hands on a relic at a decent price, they could sell it to almost anybody with money for an astonishing profit. Here's the issue. As the popularity and demand grew for relics, the supply didn't really. Which was great for investors because, supply and demand, but that also gave incentive for others. The only way that a relic could really even be brought into this underground market was by a crusader who would go and reclaim the relic from the Holy Land, or a merchant who would do business in the Holy Land, hopefully trying to get a relic or something close to a relic that they could buy cheap and sell for a massive profit back in Europe. But these two methods were slow and could not keep up with demand whatsoever, which is why some interesting individuals decided to help contribute to that supply chain issue. Here's the deal. Obviously, these relics have absolutely no certificate of authenticity or receipt or any sort of tracking on where they came from. It's essentially just word of mouth. So if you were a respected or authoritative or even just a charismatic figure, you could kind of pass off anything as a relic with enough convincing. And that's exactly the scam that we are going to discuss. Fake black market Christian relics. Some famous examples of this would be fake bones. For example, St. John the Baptist was a famous saint that people claimed to have relics of, and these relics were his bones. But once all of the bones that were claimed to be his were accounted for and organized, it was concluded that either St. John had 3 heads and 5 arms, or some people had some fake relics. 2 other famous and common fake relics were pieces of the Holy Shroud and splinters from the cross that Jesus was crucified on. Obviously, any part of either of these items would have extreme significance to history, and even the tiniest morsel of either of these items would be massively valuable. And for that reason, people decided to make their own. At the time, the only way that these relics could be verified is if they actually had provable miracle abilities. So if a church had a relic in it, and somebody with a disability was healed, or a sick person was made healthy again, or a dying person was living longer, or a poor man came into money, if any of these happened after somebody encountered the relic would have been proved real. And the people who had experienced miracles from these relics would go and tell their friends and their family, essentially marketing the church that had this relic in-house. But even with that being said, who's to say if these people had experienced miracles from genuine or non-genuine items? It really kind of gets messy from there. Once the industry of fake relics began to become exposed, it was almost a running joke at the time that if they bought all of the splinters being sold from the cross, they would actually be able to build a warship out of all of the wood. If anybody tries to sell you a piece of wood telling you that it came from the cross that Jesus was crucified on, I would probably pass, or at least confirm it can do miracles before you buy it. The Renaissance era. If you've watched any of my time period videos, you would know that I've actually never covered the Renaissance era by itself, mostly because the time period itself is short and kind of similar to the era that took place before it. One of the most famous figures to come out of the Renaissance era was Michelangelo, likely most famous for his statue of David. But did you know that he got his start by scamming? Circa 1496, Michelangelo sculpted a marble sleeping Cupid. It was an extremely lifelike and beautiful sculpture that highlighted exactly how talented Michelangelo was even at an early age. But during the Renaissance era, art collectors weren't necessarily looking for modern art. They were looking for historic pieces, which typically meant ancient Roman or Greek statues, rather than new ones. So what Michelangelo did with this statue of the Cupid was he decided, instead of selling it for a cheaper price compared to the antiques, he decided to make his new statue an antique by intentionally wearing it down. It's not quite confirmed how he did it, but he made sure to make this sculpture look worn. And it obviously worked because he was actually able to sell it as a lost Roman antiquity. And not only was he able to sell it, but he sold it for a much higher price than he was initially looking for. The sculpture was actually sold to a cardinal, Raphael Riario, who initially was fooled, but eventually discovered the truth. When Cardinal Raphael discovered the truth and confronted Michelangelo, he wasn't upset with him, he was actually impressed, and he invited Michelangelo to Rome. And when Michelangelo came to Rome, he was given his first major opportunity in his career, and this was the actual opportunity that launched Michelangelo's career and made him the icon that he is today. This cardinal was able to understand the genius of the young Michelangelo, and was likely thinking that if he could point him in the right direction, he could create one of the best artists of all time. So yeah, as far as Renaissance scams are concerned, I think Michelangelo selling one of his original artworks as an antiquity summarizes this era perfectly. And it's kind of ironic to think that Michelangelo literally had to make his art something else to try and sell it. Regardless, Michelangelo was dope. But when he was starting out, he was definitely clever when it came to selling his art. The early modern era. We've covered a lot of scams in this video so far, but one scam we haven't covered is the fake king scam. Obviously, because you can't fake being a king, right? There's no way you can just tell people that, hey, actually, I'm the king. Not only are people not going to believe you, but you're likely going to be killed. And that's the truth unless your name was Perkin Warbeck, who in the 1490s not only claimed to be a king, but also became a serious threat for the reigning king at the time. And he gained significant backing and support. But before we get to how this entire scam ends, let me tell you how it starts. Perkin Warbeck claimed to be the younger of the 2 princes in the tower, which, if you're unfamiliar, the princes in the tower refers to a mysterious disappearance of 2 young royals. King Edward V of England and his younger brother, Prince Richard of Shrewsbury, Duke of York. They were both heirs to the throne of King Edward IV of England, but at the ages of 12 and 9, they were locked away in the Tower of London by their uncle, and they were never seen again. This obviously caused a lot of issues within the kingdom, but for Perkin Warbeck, this created an opportunity. Before pretending to be a king, Warbeck was born into a rich merchant-class family and traveled around and spent time in Ireland selling silks before him and his friend came up with the plan to impersonate the younger of the 2 brothers who disappeared. As this missing person was not only not found, but was an heir to a throne. meaning that if this person was found, they had legitimate claim to the kingdom, which is definitely a title worth fighting for. Warbeck didn't just necessarily hit the streets telling everybody, hey, by the way, I'm the prince and I'm back and I'm totally good. He was very strategic in who he decided to lay his claim to, which was high-ranking government officials. He gained his first piece of notable support from King Charles VIII of France. And this is a major piece of backing to have behind you, because if the king of another country recognizes and supports you as the lost heir to a throne, you have some serious credibility to your claim. But this didn't last long. As King Henry VII, the current king, had formed an alliance with the King of France, there was no longer support from the King of France to be helping Perkin Warbeck. So we kind of had to start from scratch once again. So the next place that Perkin Warbeck went for support is actually insane, because he went to the actual sister of the lost princes in the tower, and not only did he go there to claim that he was her long-lost brother, but she bought it up. She was like, oh yeah, you are totally my long-lost brother. And now this support was likely even more valuable than the initial support, because no sibling is going to accept a faker as their long-lost sibling, right? Regardless of their beliefs or intentions, this duchess appeared to believe Perkin Warbeck, and with this support, Perkin continued his conquest to claim that he was the long-lost king. The following year, in 1493, he attended the funeral of Maximilian's father, Frederick III, where he was actually recognized as King Richard IV of England at the funeral. And it only took 2 more years in 1495 for support for Warbeck to have the throne bubbling within England. Warbeck was actually able to gather an army of 150 people and attempted a landing in Kent, where Warbeck and his small army were met with locals who were loyal to their actual king, Henry VII, and the Battle of Deal ensued. Most of this army died, and Warbeck retreated back to Ireland. But even in Ireland, he was facing issues and once again fled to Scotland. While in Scotland, Perkin was actually able to set up an arranged marriage with one of the relatives of the king, known as Lady Catherine Gordon. And now, after officially becoming royalty in some regard, the Scottish palace was open to Warbeck to gather his army and begin to plan another attack on England. The attack that Perkin Warbeck and the Scottish king had planned ended up failing before it even started. And what I mean by that is, before the battle even started, they essentially retreated. But the following year, the Scottish king and Warbeck tried again, but this time their landing was different. In 1497, support for the current king of England was low, primarily to new taxes and rising legislation. And for this reason, and because more time had passed for people to sympathize with Perkin, who was pretending to be the lost king, there was slightly more popularity for him on English soil. So this landing was met with some support. He actually was able to raise a rebellion and was declared King Richard IV, the person he was claiming to be this entire time. And at this point, it may have seemed that his plan was successful, and his next plan of attack was to siege the city, where King Henry VII was currently residing. And this siege failed, and once again, his men died, and Perkin Warbeck had to go into hiding once again. And he was able to flee successfully. Well, at least successfully, because he escaped the battle alive, but not fully successfully, because the place that he ended up residing applied a lot of pressure to Perkin. So much pressure so that he actually ended up surrendering himself to the English government, because he was promised a pardon if he surrendered instead of causing any more battles. In 1497, while being tried in front of the real king himself, Perkin Warbeck finally came clean about his elaborate scam and fake life. He told the king that he was not the prince in the tower and he was not royalty whatsoever. He straight up admitted to being a pretender because he was promised immunity for telling the truth. But obviously that wasn't the case. After this admission, he was kept close to the king and essentially imprisoned. And a year later, he actually tried to escape England, where he was caught and brought back, and at that point he was put, ironically, in the Tower of London, where the initial 2 lost princes were lost from. And it was in here where Perkin Warbeck tried to plan another escape and another overthrowing of the government, essentially. That plan was uncovered, and Perkin Warbeck was executed in 1499. This was a bit of a longer segment, but I wanted to go into detail because this story is literally insane. In a 9-year span, Perkin Warbeck is going from a rich kid who's just living in Ireland, selling silk, to, from the suggestion of a friend, dedicating the next 9 years of his life essentially on a conquest to claim that he is the long-lost heir to the throne and trying to overthrow the English king, in which he almost does successfully and ends up admitting everything and then dying because of it. If that's not a scam, I don't know what is. The modern era. Unfortunately, there is absolutely no shortage of scams in the modern day, and I'm sure anybody watching this video right now could name at least 5 to 10 scams just off the top of their head. And That's primarily because of access of information. And at least today, scams are exposed quicker than they would have been at any point in history before. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're exposed quickly enough. This video has been way longer than I anticipated it to be, and because we post every single Friday, I gotta cut it here. And I think the best way for me to tell you the craziest scams in the modern day would actually be by checking out the video on screen right now. Because in this video on screen, I go into detail about the 5 biggest scams that's happened in the modern day, including the first ever Ponzi scheme and why it's called a Ponzi scheme, the Enron scandal, and 3 other crazy scandals that you may or may not have heard of. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. And as always, trust you, bro.